Wow. I thought I was going to have an easy act to follow. And then he gets up on stage, if you know what I mean. What a wonderful introduction. You're probably going to see a little, how many of you used to work at Sun here? There's quite a few ex-Sun, probably a lot of you have heard me speak before. It's a little different now. I'm not the CEO of a publicly traded company selling lots of stuff to governments. So I might share a little more of my innermost feelings than I have normally shared with you. But anyhow, thanks Doug and Tony and SCE for putting this on and actually for driving what I think is a very, very important message. I believe humans are moderately social. If you put too many humans there's too many rats in a small cage, you get New York or San Francisco. If you put too few of them in, you get Kaczynski in Montana. And I think, so I think we need to find some natural balance between those kinds of, so from a human nature perspective, I think telework, allowing you to go away, do your work, and then come back and commune with other folks and then get away again is a much more natural environment. Somebody called them mucus messengers, all the rest of it. You know, it is, I don't think, terribly healthy for us all to be always tightly packed. So from that perspective, it was kind of nice to drive through the farmlands with my wife today on the way out here and get away from what I'm now calling CEO Turnover Valley, which go read the New York Times. The New York Times talks about the process by which, you know, Yahoo's got their thing going on. Apple has probably a one I wish they didn't have to go through. But New York Times has an article about how they hired the previous HP CEO with half the board not even ever meeting the new candidate, which I find fascinating because I think there's only one really important job that a board member has, and that's to hire and fire the CEO. I mean, that's the only thing. If you get that one right, if you hire Steve Jobs, you're done. You know, it's just fascinating. But anyhow, apparently I was a pretty high-ranking candidate at the last go-round, and my buddy sent me a note on email. He goes, after you read the article, you'll see it was a terrible process. Nobody wanted the job. They couldn't find anybody good. And he said, how did it feel to come in second place in that process? I won't share with you the email I sent back to my buddy. I want to ask a quick question just to kind of make a point. How many of you are in your office right now? Yeah, right. That's the point, right? Either you are or you aren't. Either way, it's a huge statement that telework is kind of what the world is all about and where we need to go to. I spent an enormous amount of time. Sun was clearly an early adopter of this whole telework experience, and when we started getting into it, it was not a technical issue. We solved the technical issues with Sunray and with all the workplace tools and the management styles that we were driving inside the company. I always used to talk at the leadership conference. I would say to my folks, how many of you have your boss within earshot of your workplace or office? And at Sun, we were global, and so only a couple of people would actually raise their hand and say, I can actually see my boss from my cubicle. And I said, how many of you are upset about that? All the hands went down. Because there's a very clear answer. People do not like to be managed. They love to be led. And leading is not about micromanaging and watching. So we had an early adopter challenge to go make this happen inside of Sun. But the one message that became very clear to me, being the chief executive officer that I was, is that anytime I walked through on a Wednesday, in the rain, when nobody's out golfing, you know, kind of mid-morning when you expect everybody to be at work, I would walk down a hall and max, I would see 15% occupancy, maybe 30% occupancy on the busiest work day, not a holiday week or anything like that, in the offices. And I go, why are we spending all this money on something? And if you think about the 168 hours per week, how many hours of those 168 are you in your office. Think about it during the week. 15% occupancy, you're lucky if your organization is getting 15% occupancy on your office space. So we went and drove this, and the billion-dollar numbers are very real that we saved at Sun Microsystems. Literally, we saved between $50 and $100 million a year just in real estate lease costs alone. Several million dollars a year just in powers, probably more now, because we seem to have a national energy policy in the United States that is maximizing kilowatt hours or barrels of oil price. That just seems to be the DOE policy. Let's see if we can maximize all of that. Now, we're all in the private sector on a little different. I mean, if the DMV blows its budget, you don't go out of business. If we do, we're done. So there's a little different, and that's why I was a little hesitant to come up here and talk to the public sector about this, because the urgency is not there. It's immediate death if we blow our budgets in the private sector. So this is all about doing things that actually are potentially quite counter to what the legislature here or the energy policy folks want to go do or whatever. It is very counter to. I remember the first time I came to Sacramento and they had a guy sitting on a stool pushing the Otis elevator buttons. Piss me off as a. I consider myself and all of you national economic heroes because you pay taxes. And as a national economic hero, not a real national hero like we have sitting here, but an economic hero, I got kind of pissed off. We were using my taxpayer dollars and wasting a brain. I mean, do you realize how much torture? Go try sitting in an elevator for all day pushing the buttons for people. Your brain will be fried. That's torture. Well, I'd rather be waterboarded, I think, than doing the kinds of jobs. But, that's part of the problem is legislature is looking for that kind of activity. So this is going to be a little tougher than it was at Sun to go implement just from a motivation and urgency, a support perspective. And I applaud you all for, I promise not to tell anybody. And the good news is Zoe couldn't see who was here, right? Because they may say one thing, but they're in a very, very different world. Their value and their ability to get reelected is all about them solving the problems as opposed to getting out of the way and allowing liberty and freedom to go solve the problem. So it's going to be an interesting challenge. Now, you all got a little flavor for where I come from on all of these issues. But as an early adopter, I heard a lot of excuses for why somebody needed an office. And there might even be a good excuse to keep commercial real estate going right now, because there is a commercial real estate bubble. Trust me, there is a massive one, and we haven't even come close to realizing all of it. We're still realizing the housing bubble. Isn't it fascinating how the foreclosures keep happening? Well, it's going to happen in commercial real estate, especially if you all execute on what we're talking about. So people might want to just wait till the next election, depending on your. So who knows what your motivations are for all of this. I certainly think that President Obama has no interest in telework and creating an earlier realization of the commercial real estate bubble popping. So, I'm just trying to share with you, there are very interesting macro things, but there's also a lot of micro reasons for not wanting to go to telework, shared offices, hoteling, work from home, all the rest of it. And I think I've probably heard all of the excuses for why people needed their own office, but I thought I'd give you the top 10 greatest, and I know you heard some other top 10 like things, but the top 10 greatest justifications for needing a dedicated government or corporate office space. So if you're ready for it. Now, I don't have a marketing department who writes this stuff anymore. So you have to laugh even if they're not funny, all right? All right. Yeah, I'd have no sound effects. You guys, can you do like crashing glass back there? We are in a recession. So the number 10, I don't know if I have the right numbers here. Number 10, need a place to hang a picture of my Chihuahua. That's number 9, how can I micromanage my direct reports if I can't see them? There we go. Number 8, number 8 justification, naps and/or nooners with coworkers. See, I couldn't say that as a public company CEO. I think I'm on number 7. Need storage for pilfered coffee, toiletries, condiments, and kids' school supplies. And the AC is free, too. All right. Next one, number 6. Would have to still work on spare the air days. Number 5. Pure and simple, I have self-esteem issues. Dad had one, and Jerry Brown has one. I want one. Number, what are we, 4? I prefer to make my pay-by-the-minute phone calls in private. Oh, this one, I got to stand behind somewhere. I think we're on number 3. The public sector union work rules mandate private offices. I love not being a CEO anymore. Number 2, your spouse wants you out of the house, or you can't stand being home with your spouse, or both. And the number 1 reason for needing an office at work, you can't brown nose virtually. There you have it. All right, so there's a lot of motivations for wanting to keep your office, but we kind of hammered through all of those. I'm going to show you some slides that we used at Sun. In fact, there's a lot of people here who helped us do that at Sun. The Better Workplace folks here, raise your hand, all the Better Workplace folks. They're all ex-Sun folks here. Scott Fleming, there they are. These guys are all, these guys you ought to go see because they actually implemented at Sun. They took the full frontal assaults and the arrows in the back and all of the trips in the hall and all the rest of it to go make this happen. And but it was actually not a technical issue. And in fact, it was very much supportive of the 1980s slogan that we had, the network is the computer. That's what we lived and breathed. And you know, the network is your office. So it was very supportive of that, but still people fought it. It wasn't a technology issue. It was all of those self-esteem or old-style management issues or a whole bunch of issues that prevent. So it was more of an HR issue, a process change management issue than it was a technical issue or even a financial issue, because if you didn't get people to go do it. We had a lot of people fight it, but this is an old slide, but it's still a new idea to everybody, is that it became very clear to me as we went to this, I didn't know where fun started and work began or ended or whatever, because it was just all one thing. I mean, I remember my dad used to get in the car, drive off, and he'd come home, grab a scotch, and it was done, right? That's just, it just isn't that way. I work all through the weekends. I get up at 5 or 6 a.m. I've done probably 150 emails by the time the boys get up, my 4 boys get up. And, you know, that's just the way it is. Or I'll made a whole bunch of phone calls. That's what I love about the cell phone, because, you know, people can call me and it doesn't wake the boys up. I got 4 boys at home. So these are slides from a long time ago at Sun, but this is just something you do anywhere and everywhere you can. And the realities are all very clear. It's nothing new to you, but you know, I think this work-life balance thing is absolutely critical. If you have life challenges and requirements, the commute gets in the way of all of that. And I will tell you a truthful statement. I was at the golf course 20 years ago, and I'm at the halfway shack, and some guy goes, "Hey, you're Scott McNealy." And I go, "Yeah, who are you?" And he goes, "Oh," I go, "Where do you work?" He goes, "I work for," I think it was Cisco or something like that. Or what. I said, "That's cool." I said, "What do you do there?" He goes, "Oh, blah, blah." I go, "What are you doing here? It's Wednesday, you know. It's noon on Wednesday." He goes, "Oh, this is work from home day." I won't tell John, don't worry, you know, it just, so that it can be abused, but fundamentally, you can't let that stop you. It's just, it changes everybody's morale and perspectives. The number one reason for doing it, in my view, is the cost. And as a raging capitalist, a huge libertarian who believes in, you know, pay for performance, you know, it's all about cost and investing and building value for shareholders and taking products and services that add value to your customers. But that's hard to sell to your employees, to your coworkers, to the management, and it isn't what everybody wants to hear. I'm all of a sudden living in a world where profits is bad. It's greedy, and all the rest of it. So we don't sell it that way. There are lots of really good reasons for doing this. The number one source of carbon emissions is facilities. If you can reduce the number of facilities, that's where man-made carbon emissions come from. So it's a very green thing. We called it ECO at Sun, because if you weren't into the green thing, you could say it was economic. If you were, you could call it ecological. So we just called it ECO. That got everybody on the boat. So that was really, really important. We also found that being close to the problem was really key, and being able to reform working groups, because it turns out that the shelf life of a process is like the shelf life of a banana. The shelf life of a task or a project is getting shorter and shorter. Have you ever watched MTV? The average screenshot is about 4.8 nanoseconds. It's like a strobe. It is a strobe. I get dizzy watching it, but the kids, it's how the attention spans are of the new generation, and they multitask. They'll watch 17 strobes at one time, and they'll process all of this in very different ways. So being able to get set up immediately and to reform and say, all right, everybody, let's just meet on the second floor of the third building in the southwest corner, and the people who want to work on that project can all go be there and set up. I remember when I was in New York City a couple of decades ago, and they would say it was $1,500 just to move a PC from one office to another administratively, with the unions moving wires and reconfiguring things. We moved on average, before we started our telework, 1.7 moves per employee, office moves per employee on the growth ramp that we were on. And that was very expensive. Now imagine, when we got to telework, we just took our smart card out of the Sunray, walked down the hall, boom. That was the move. Just remember to bring your card. You couldn't get through the door without bringing your card, so you never forgot your card. So there's a lot of agility issues, but the one that really got us there was what it did for morale and what it did for folks. And it was a pretty aggressive effort. We had more than half of the company working in I called it homeless environment. We're homeless at Sun, you know, that's cool. You know, you just, everywhere is your home. It turns out sales reps loved to work in the cafeteria at headquarters, you know, the Bay Area sales reps, because we had Sunrays scattered around in little cafe things. And they'd come and they'd do their work, and they'd watch, and James Gosling, the father of Java, would walk by, and they'd grab him and talk to him about coming to see their customer or a question they were, or they'd see the vice president of manufacturing and say, what's going on? And they could get an enormous amount of work done at the workstation, but communing with everybody who came through the cafeteria, because most people had to eat. So it was a very, very different environment that they truly, truly enjoyed. And the growth rate of this was actually pretty quick. And I got to tell you, there were a lot of people who fought it, but you can't have manufacturing folks work at home. You can't send the workstation around, so there are some jobs that are just not, and the parks and recreation folks or the utilities folks or the road, you can't have people out repairing roads from the home. So there's obviously some jobs, but obviously the office work kinds of jobs, project management kinds of jobs, where communications can happen, really, it just doesn't make sense. You can't get those jobs done in the office, and the stuff that you can get done. Think about people who do spend all day at one desk. Why do they need to be somewhere else? Why can't they do that from the network? The network is the computer. So there's really, unless you're actually out doing something physical out somewhere else, it all really should be pushed out and driven from that perspective. So we ramped it up very, very aggressively. I have no idea what's happened over the last couple, 3 years since Oracle took over. But we had all of the right technologies, all the right methodologies, and it all lives on in a lot of the folks that are here in the room in terms of going and making that happen. We looked at it from a technology perspective. Sunray wasn't the most successful product because everybody liked to be their own personal administrator. People were data huggers. People enjoyed being a systems administrator for their PC. People felt computer literate because they could hit Control Alt Delete and restart their computer, all the rest of it. That still exists today. People want to hug their music, but the music's moving back to the cloud from the iPod. It all moves in pendulums, right? Remember, everybody had to have an iPod. Now all of a sudden it's getting back out onto the network. Your data is now being stored as storage as a service. It's XaaS, anything as a service now. It's called the cloud. We called it the network as a computer decades ago. If we had been smart, we just called it cloud back then, and we'd have saved a lot of words. But I still think network as a computer is more clever than cloud. But the technology is clearly there in all kinds of. SCE has some outstanding technology to go implement this, and they're a natural here to host this kind of environment. So it's not a technology issue. Workplaces, they're kind of messed up in the sense that they're all built to be beehives, with a little cell for each bee to go hang out and hide and store their honey. I meant never mind. So they really aren't architected the way they should be, and I'll come back to that, the whole facilities space. I will tell you that at least in the private sector, I tell everybody things will change above, below, and around you faster than you've ever imagined before. And if I could go back and do Sun Microsystems over again, and I go talk to business schools all the time, I tell them, they say, what would you do differently? What's your advice that you don't get in business school? I will tell you, especially if it has anything to do with technology, buy short, never go long. And that means do not sign any contract that is any farther than you can see with 2010 clarity. Don't do long-term contracts, whatever. And the worst thing you can do is a long-term lease. I will tell you, when the bubble went like this back in 99, 2000, Sun probably wrote off $4 billion, I'm guessing at the number, $4 billion worth of real estate. We wrote off a skyscraper that was never built in San Francisco, that we signed a lease to have built. And every major capital or facilities, fortunately Facebook came along. Sell your Facebook stock. They just bought a big, huge facility. Do you think Apple might have peaked? They're doing their new big Cupertino campus. Things change, and it never feels like it. And the worst thing you can do is do that 10, 20, 30-year lease, because that just gets you stuck. And they're all built the wrong way, and I'll get into that later. But the real issue is work practices, and that was the one we spent a lot of time on, and we used Six Sigma and change management processes and spent a lot of time with the employees, most of it with the managers. Because like I said, the workers had no problem not seeing their boss. The leaders had a huge problem with that. What am I going to do? Well, get your job done. Now, the one rule that I managed through analogies and one-liners, and the one I had was the rule of 11. And the rule of 11, for those ex-Sun folks, was I wanted you to have at least 11 people reporting to you. Because when you have 11 people reporting to you, you can't manage them. You have to lead them. And that, it really is, it just drives, you can't, because a lot of times I go in and somebody would have 3 direct reports, all of which were managers reporting to them, and they'd have 4 people reporting to them, and then you end up with this. So the second problem with this is that when somebody down there who's doing the real work whispers up to their boss something, and then they to the boss, and then it goes up to the top and then back down, it's the whisper, the circle, around the 12 people sitting around the table. What you lose, my gut tells me, my experience tells me, you lose about 20% of the message every time you go through a management exchange, up or down the management thing. So if you think about 0.8 times 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 0.8 times, it's dangerously inaccurate what happens when a message travels or a communique travels across organizations. So the fewer layers of management, what you want to have, just go to your organization. If you have more than 9% managers, you got a problem. If you have more than 9% of the folks have somebody reporting to them, you got a problem. And so I think people can lead 12, 15, 17 people just fine. If you do a good job leading them, putting the goals in front of them, all the rest of it. And then all of a sudden, you don't really care where they're working because you're leading, not managing. And that's the style we had to drive. So that was one of the biggest breakthroughs we had to drive. Now, it also became very complicated when you go through layoffs, because when you go ask people to do layoffs, the branches, who are the managers, aren't going to get rid of branches, they're going to get rid of leaves. And so all of a sudden you see all the leaves fall off a tree, and all the managers are standing around. I got nobody to lead, so I got to manage, which makes the leaves dry up and fall and go away even faster. And pretty soon you're sitting there looking at a dead hunk of wood carcass with no photosynthetic capabilities whatsoever. So that's also a challenge, which gets at the workplace environments that you need. So the bottom piece there, performance management tools and policies that enable, support, and reward results-based management. That's another way of saying, lead. Don't manage your folks, and they'll be much more comfortable in this environment. So we spent a lot of time trying to train folks to go do that. We're pretty scientific about it. We had a team in HR that would go out and collect data, communicate, drive, and support this. So we had SWAT teams that would go into different departments and all the rest of it. I remember when we were going to take PCs away from software engineers. Holy man. And then we give them a Sunray, and they go, where's my computer? I have no CPU. Well, all of a sudden they found out they got access to this massive cloud full of all of the high-end Spark processors, and they could do a make or a build or a compile like this, and there was no fan in their office, no space heater, and they had a nice, quiet, they loved it. And then all of a sudden they could do it at home, because most software engineers do all of their work in the middle of the night. So when they had an idea or they felt motivated, or they could just execute. It became a very, very powerful win for them. So the benefits were clear. I'm not going to go into the numbers. The numbers are stunning. It clearly was a huge agility thing for us, and it paid for the R&D. Sunray was not a massively successful product out in the marketplace, but it was one of the most profitable products we had. And if nobody ever bought one, I would have continued to do the R&D, because we ran Sun on that product, and it saved us a huge amount. Our customers and partners loved that. We actually had resellers hooked into our network, and they became part of our extended family. It allowed us to get closer to the customer, spend more time with the customer, be remote with the customer. And there's no reason not to do it now. We did it all pretty much hardwired back in the olden days when we started this. Now with Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, iPads and iPhones and all of the stuff we have today, it's better than the PC. And for those of you who carry around an iPad instead of a PC, you'll know. It's better on your back. But the big win, it really wasn't getting it done. Really, we couldn't talk about how it helped the customer or helped the shareholder. We had to talk about the benefits to the employee and get them over that, because they will sabotage it if they're not excited about it. By the halfway mark, when I would walk into a town hall in a particular department and say, by the way, we're going to roll out Sunrays to all of you and put one in your home, I would get a huge cheer and applause, because people were dying to get these in their home so that they could handle the work-life balance. It became a huge perk. We measured it. We got about, I think it was between 10 and 15% more hours of work when people had work from anywhere and work from home setup, and they were happier about it, even though they were working 10 to 15%. Don't tell the unions. There's probably, it would probably create a lawsuit at this point. How could you work our folks more hours and not pay them more? Well, they were happier. They got to go to their kid's soccer game or the piano recital, or they could work when they were sick and not get behind, or they worked on the weekends and got caught up because there were things like maybe driving the kids to school that they wanted to do during the week. So it was just a huge morale boost. We had proven significantly lower retention, better employee attraction from people who wanted to go work at a place that allowed you to go do it. It was across the board, from engineers to secretaries to everybody else. It was just an across-the-board perk, and it showed up as one of the two top reasons people enjoyed working at Sun, was that they didn't have to work at Sun. This is for the green EKOS. There's our former governor and former CEO getting a big award from the Environmental Defense Fund for the many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2 that were saved by this process are amazing. And to me, that was very economic, because putting that CO2 in the air is expensive to do, because you got to buy the carbon and then put it in the air. So that was just expensive. Granted, it helped plants grow, but I don't want to get into that. The real opportunity here is also the savings for the employee around their car and the gas that they had to spend, the savings on wardrobe were amazing. There's probably a lot. I mean, this new thing with the camera on your, on your PC, you don't want that because if you're there in your Speedo, you don't really want to share that with the rest of the world, but you don't have to. So, but again, I mean, OSHA was the most dangerous part of most people's job is getting to and from your job, so that changes a lot. Now, the last point I want to make, I had mentioned about facilities. The reason you don't want to get into a long-term lease, if I were to do Sun's Menlo Park campus that Facebook is moving into right now, and Facebook is already doing a lot of that, they're tearing out all the walls. Because headquarters should not be, or facilities should not be little cubicles where you go in like a beehive and hide and close the door. It should be town hall. So it should have lunchrooms, workout facilities, conference facilities, demo facilities, theaters, labs, all kinds of, just an enormous number of conference rooms and customer visit centers and those sorts of things. And almost no closed-door offices, because that's not why you drive in to be with people, is to wall yourself off. So how you would design a space is going to look much more like that on the right than that on the left. And I would say 98% of the real estate, commercial real estate, is very poorly designed, and you're stuck with an albatross that drives the wrong kind of behavior, the wrong kind of integration, the wrong kind of communal behavior that you're looking for when you do ask people to drive and get together. Another little trick rule that we used at Sun was I had a guideline. It wasn't a fast rule. No meetings before 10:30 and no meetings after 3 p.m. Right? So what I would do is I would work in the morning from home, and then at 10 o'clock I'd get in the car. I've had breakfast at home, saved money there, and got the kids out, and I've been doing work since 6 a.m. So I'd work from 6 till 10 at home, and I'd have a 18-minute commute instead of a 45-minute commute to the office, work, and then I'd get the heck out of there after meeting everybody, go make my phone calls or go do a customer dinner up in the city or whatever else, or head to the airport or whatever else I needed to do. It was a very successful way of facilitating telecommunications, because it doesn't have to be that you don't go in at all. It's just rush hour is a disaster. So again, these are the kinds of environments we want to drive and make happen. Let me just make sure I got all the points I wanted to cover. I think I know you've all talked about it, but another reason we used to justify this was, California is the land of natural disasters. I mean, we can have fires and mudslides in the same week. We have earthquakes. We have enormous other natural disasters like gas pipeline explosions or city and state bankruptcies, late ratification of state budgets. We have Snowmageddon, Carmageddon. We have our legislature. We have all kinds of natural disasters here. So working from home at some point is going to become a big, big opportunity. The one we used was bird flu mitigation strategy. Remember bird flu? Whatever happened to bird flu? It disappeared, I guess. I don't know. But everybody really should have a disaster recovery plan. And those of you who saw what happened in Japan recently will understand it can have a very major impact on everything. So anyhow, that's what we did. It was one of the most successful projects we had inside of Sun. And I will contrast that to our Oracle ERP project that we were executing on with much vigor, and we spent $500 or $600 million to date upgrading to the latest release of Oracle, and we still didn't have it implemented, and we were still years away from implementing it. Oracle bought us. First thing Larry Ellison did was he shut the project down. I thought that was hilarious. Anyhow, this was one of the successful projects that we did. Happy to answer any questions or take any barbs or comments, please.
How do you rationalize teleworking for the manager?
I think the manager has a lot of the manager should be working too. And so they should have a job. They should be working on their stuff. They should be reading emails and providing. I always thought of my job as, especially at the top, as being a big telephone switch or network switch. And I was, gathering information here and sharing it there. And I did literally 1,200 emails a day, literally, just assimilating information, passing it on, forwarding it, FYI, you handle this. I was doling out, literally like a switch, doling out information, actions, activities, follow-ups, reports, and actually writing policies and all the rest of it. And then I would get everybody in a room and I'd look to check out body language on, who was unhappy with a decision, or why are you unhappy? Let's all share our innermost feelings about this. Once we're over that, okay, thank you, that was nice, now go. But you have to do that. A good leader has to be participative but not consensus. You have to be sensitive and listen and understand their positions and then explain yours, because humans just don't execute totally on an email. And you know that in combat, you don't just say, go do this. You explain, this is why we're going after the Taliban, right? And there's a reason for it, and you got to have a higher order bit. So there are times when you need to be together to figure out what the corporate mission is, and I thought more importantly the corporate cause was, or your organizational cause, or your departmental cause. I think too many managers or leaders don't figure out what the cause is. They know what the mission, strategy, tactics, all the rest of it, but they don't get to what human nature wants, which is, what is the cause? What is the human capital that we're counting on and delivering in our organization to make people want to go that little extra yard? And you may not agree with the leaders' personal views, but you'll buy into their corporate cause and their corporate missions. Well, you'll act much better. So I think the managers are they have kids too. I had 4 boys. I want to be home for soccer or a hockey game or whatever. So it all fits in. It all fits in. I look at them as more likely to be teleworking than maybe as a second level manager than somebody who's a foreman, out on the line. So, question over here.
Oh, yes, hi. In the private sector, it's very easy to equate telework with productivity and productivity leading to profits. In the public sector, where we have more of an accountability measure for savings and not wasting money, how do we validate telework and how do we make it or present it in a cost-effective or cost-savings model? And where do we get the numbers? I know we had someone speak earlier about numbers, but that's really the question when we're trying to make a business case for telework, well, at least from my experience anyway.
Right. So you got at the core of the issue, which is why I'm a raging capitalist and a raging libertarian. I think by definition, and I'm not an anarchist, all right? I believe there are absolutely critical things that government needs to do for all of us, including defense, State Department, the Justice Department, that sort of thing. There are some very, very clear roles. But understand, all of those will be prosecuted by our government in a very inefficient and ineffective manner. Nobody would argue that we prosecute war efficiently, effectively, and a lot of people die when we do it. So and there's a lot of collateral damage. And nobody would say our court systems are the model of efficiency and effectiveness on this plan. But we got to do them, we got to have them. The problem is government is overreached, and they're getting into what I consider things that are better left to the massively unfair invisible hand. Well, the massively unfair invisible hand provides an enormous amount of discipline around financial ROI analysis. Let me tell you, if I, as the CEO of Sun Microsystems, had ever handed in audited income statement and balance sheet like Sacramento does, where they revise it 3 years later. I mean, I would be so in jail. I'd be going, Bernie Madoff, how's it going, buddy? Want to go lift some weights? You know, every one of those folks are running cooked books. They use as far away from GAAP standard accounting procedures to account for, hey, I just saved $4.6 billion. You didn't save it. You're just going to grow your overspending by $4.6 billion less than you threatened to do before. That's how their accounting works. I would get so thrown in jail as a public company CEO for doing that. So you have a real hard problem because there are no reasonable, accurate, audited ways to manage expenses and account for and report expenses in the public sector. Just, there aren't. I'm sorry, there just aren't. And in a big state like California or any other municipality, the higher, the bigger, the worse it gets. So you got a real problem because the number one reason I did this was cost. Exactly. So I feel your pain, and I said to my wife, I said, why am I going to go up there? These guys have a hopeless task of trying to get people to do the right things. Because then you got the politicians who say, you're going to lay off how many people? You're going to wreck our economy by, you know, having foreclosure on commercial real estate by not using. I mean, we're going to take that guy out of the audit. What's he going to do? Right? Well, maybe he's going to go do something good, you know. But that doesn't ever cross their mind. So you've got a political problem, you've got an accounting problem, and then you have a union problem, which, you know, the work rules thing is a big, huge issue, and there's a very corrupt cycle between the union and the politicians who pay them. And I never understood why. I grew up in the auto industry and all the rest of it, and I read all about in the 1920s we needed to protect workers from really bad corporations. Well, I think we're kind of through that. I think the whole reason for unions is collective bargaining is probably not necessary anymore. But that's my own personal view. But for sure, we don't need collective bargaining to protect public sector employees from our government. Do you realize how silly that sounds? Do we so not trust our government that they're going to abuse our workers? So we need collective bargaining and all of the work rules that they drive, which, as you all know, work rules are all inefficient. They're all inefficient. So you've got an enormous task. I applaud you. This is worthy of doing. Your employees will be happier. Families will stay together. Kids will see their parents. No, I'm serious. There's some very real good things that will happen if we can go implement this. We won't need to spend as much on roads because we will be using them in a more balanced and a better way. So there's so many good things that will happen here, but we are going against an enormous amount of inertia in the public sector. And that's why I'd like to get this out of as many tasks out of the public sector as possible. I'm not arguing we outsource defense. I'm not an anarchist, but you know, this is where the size of government ought to be absolutely limited. And the other thing I'd like to see is we limit the federal government to, say, 15% of GDP, and then let the states cover for anything that they think they need to go do. And then we'll have the states compete, because the beauty of the United States is we can have 50 different states competing for different models about how much government and where government should be. When the US government does it, I got no choice, unless I want to change citizenship, which is awfully hard to do, unless you're coming here.
The public sector is affected as much by the consumerization of IT and the fact that we're probably living in a post-PC world. Isn't it just a matter of time before the public sector gets it? Because
yes. Yeah, it's a matter of time, but as a national economic hero, I wish they'd figure it out sooner. Right? So yeah, absolutely. Here.
Can you wrap some words around how you actually measured the productivity increase? I mean, that's what always comes up.
So how did we measure productivity increase? Well, first of all, we could measure turnover, so that was very statistically clear. And whenever you lose an employee, you got a retraining problem. We all know it's much easier to hang on to a customer than find a new one, or hang on to an employee than find a new one, because you got an enormous amount of training and language and vocabulary and all those other things built up in place. So we saw a very clear win there. We also knew exactly how many hours you were logged onto the network. And that's a perfect proxy for how much work you're doing. And by the way, we turned off on the phone all of the 900 phone numbers. It was a massive, you know what the number one, you would think it might have been, you know, those sex lines or whatever. You know what the number one pay phone numbers that we had at Sun when we actually dug in and looked at it? Astrology. I was just, I mean, I can understand, the chat lines and stuff. The astrology, I'm like, I don't get it. So, and all the websites and all the rest of it. So we knew that mostly they were doing work when they were on the phone or working. So that was another way we drove productivity. But and then when we did the surveys and we found out that was the second reason, happy employees work harder for you. There's no question about it. So, one last question back here.
So I'm going to ask the aging capitalist and angry taxpayer who sees the definition in the elevator. I think one of the challenges for us in the public sector, being a spokesperson for an organization, is public organizations being political punching bags for such a long time, is we almost always have to be late adopters, because unless it's accepted in the private sector and it's commonplace, there's no way we're getting past public opinion, talk radio, or anything else.
Exactly.
It's extraordinarily difficult for us to do it. Any suggestions?
No, I was just going to add on another problem you have. And that is the public purchasing procedures are I mean, they're beyond stifling, they're beyond frustrating, they are beyond, and it's all done to prevent corruption, but we all know how it works. It's the most corrupt purchasing process in the world, with more safeguards against corruption than any in the world. And that's because the invisible hand isn't there. And again, that's why I just come back to, the US government shouldn't have been running around doing Solyndra. I drive by that all the time on the way to the hockey rink, and as a national economic hero, it drives me crazy. Right? But that happens all over. There's massive overreach. And I'll just leave you with one. I didn't answer your question because I feel your pain. And I will just tell you that I want to leave you with one other thought. I had this conversation with a very bright college-educated lady who works out with us, and her husband's a very successful entrepreneur in the Valley, all the rest of it. And we had this conversation about rights. And if you go back to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and what our founding fathers created for us was the most successful economy and the most democratic environment in the world today, with the best standard of living across enormous numbers of cultures and people of different backgrounds, all the rest of it, an amazing melting pot. But it was built on liberty and rights. And I asked her, I said, is education a right? She goes, absolutely. I goes, healthcare a right? Absolutely. No. A right is something you can give everyone without taking from anyone. So freedom of speech is a right. Because I can give everybody in this room the right to speak without taking from anybody else. And what we've forgotten, and what the politicians, because you'll hear a politician all the time saying, our kids have a right to an education. You can't do that without taking from somebody. We all have a right to health care. You can't do that without taking from somebody. So let's just not confuse the conversation. We may decide we want to do redistribution. Let's call it that. And let's be fair about it. And let's be honest about it. And let's understand what rights are. And then let's understand what the scope of government ought to be. Because I've been in the Defense Department purchasing hairball for countless number of hours, but we can't change that. But there are other parts of the world, the community that we live in, that can be done much better in the private sector, so that you don't have all of these many unanswerable questions that you're asking about how. But in the meantime, given that our voters and our legislators are overreaching with government, we're all in this room, in this together to go move and drive and evangelize. And you're just going to have to stand up and take the arrows, take the talk show hits, all the rest of it, and move us forward. When you look and see what my kids are doing, they're learning online. Think about your training classes. You got to go somewhere. You know, it's all self-paced, online, on-demand, real-time scored. That's what Curricu's all about. And I would encourage you all to go to Curricu. Thank you, those of you who stayed and were at the auction last night supporting that. That's the nonprofit that's doing K through 12 educational resources, free, open source, online. I learned on a third grade math textbook that would work just fine today. You got it figured out. So why are we doing this? This is insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and thinking you'll get a different result. We spend in the United States pretty close to $15 billion a year on this stuff. I went to, this is what drives me, a lot of things drive me freaky crazy, but I went and I saw spellings, Secretary of Education spellings, and I went and saw Secretary under Bush, and I went and saw Arnie Duncan under Obama, and I asked them both. I said, give me $100 million. I know how to invest $100 million in R&D because I've done billions, and I will give you a complete K through 12 curriculum, free, open source, online, multimedia enabled, the whole deal, and every school district in the United States can have that as a free good. They looked at me like I was from Mars. You want $100 million? Are you kidding me? Good luck! Kicked me out the door. I have been running around saying we ought to just absolutely dismantle immediately the Department of Education. Because fundamentally, if we're not going to do that kind of stuff at the national level, they shouldn't be handing out pork, which is all they do, at the local level to buy votes. Because that's an administrative pork dealing mess where they just give out, they say, we give out all the money to the states. Well, then stop. Well, anyhow, enough of that. So.
See what I said?